I would just like to give a very brief talk on the most important aspect of my art in recent years that hopefully will change your perspective if you made the same mistake I did. Um, from early 2020, when I first was recording music, until about 2023, right before I finally had the right medication to get my depression under control. I lived under this illusion that more is more, less is not less is more. I went with quantity over quality. I had sort of a metastasory, if that's a word, mindset of spreading myself and my art, doing stuff as complicated as possible, as inaccessible as possible. Um, I think I regret doing that, to be very brutally honest. But you know that saying, always forgive yourself for learning stuff that only time could teach you. So maybe I got to be easier on myself in that regard. So I'm going to talk about simplicity. If there's anything that I worship in my art, in my life, it's simplicity. If I have a religion, my religion is simplicity. Now, there are so many angles that I could point to and say, here's a reason why you should um, apply simplicity in your life. There's almost too many to count. I could say what Leonardo da Vinci said. It's kind of a self-contradictory nature. You would think somebody as widely accomplished in breadth would not preach for simplicity, but he very famously writes that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. I could say what the Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore said. It's very simple to be happy. It's just very difficult to be simple, which has helped me a lot in my life. I highly agree with it now. So, where to start with simplicity? Um, People think that simplicity, especially young people, and I don't even know if it's a realistic goal to convince young people to be excited by simplicity. Not even sure if that's an attainable goal. But when I started, before I adapted simplicity in my life, I looked at simplicity as the opposite of complexity. Um, it's not. It's the foundation of complexity. Um, it's like the nature of good and evil. There's never one without the other. Um, and simplicity allows complexity to thrive. Um, it's impossible to have some cohesive, truly impressive, truly elaborate work of art if you can't zoom in on it and notice the tiny details, which are just as perfect as the whole. And there's a great book about that, called Big Little by John Crowley, which is kind of the world we live in right now, where everything has become so hyper specialized, that worlds are becoming within themselves more and more each year, as each technological revolution, as each discovery passes by. So what finally got me to overcome an obsession with complexity, an obsession with insolubility, an obsession with impenetrability, with not being transparent with my music, not being transparent with my art. What finally changed my mind was an art student who was a friend of mine, who very brilliantly said, "Isn't it funny how the most studied paintings in history are the most simple ones?" And I thought that was a very brilliant use of the word studied. Um, because I don't think there's any word that has a bigger connotation of it's made an impact and it's worth your time than studied. And it's absolutely true. If you look at the most studied paintings throughout history, pre-modern and modern, they are highly simple. They are not the Pablo Amaringo psychedelic masterpieces. They are not the Alex Gray visionary masterpieces. And believe me, I have nothing against those. I'm highly inspired and amazed by them. But really long term, beyond human lifetime, hundreds of years, it's going to be the Mona Lisa. In fact, that was what got people originally excited about it. With such high profile artists like Leonardo da Vinci in his lifetime, uh, pretty much the only people that were worthy of a portrait in accordance to society at that time were aristocrats, people who wore fancy clothes. And the original draw of the Mona Lisa was that it's a peasant farm girl that is painted very, very elaborately, which was highly unusual at the time. So simplicity was what got people first excited about that. And now it's pretty much a non-negotiable that the Mona Lisa is the most studied painting of all time. So that little saying, how this friend of mine worded it, is pretty much what single-handedly changed my mind on simplicity. Because, every artist, every musician, every scientist, every visionary, every inventor, they all have everybody has a different time horizon on their impact and their posterity and their legacy. And I've always been, I've grown much more long term as I've gotten older. I don't care if it comes at the expense of my own lifetime. I don't care if something I do is not appreciated while I'm here and they'll have to wait till after I'm gone, and I won't be alive to see that. In fact, that exact same Indian poet, Rabindranath Tagore, said that, I don't know for sure if he said it, but it's very often attributed. He said that a person who plants a person who plants a tree whose shade he will never sit in has understood the meaning of life. And I totally agree with that as well. Thinking well beyond your lifetime. And I think part of the answer that I think applies to everyone is simplicity. Like I said, there's so many quotations I can pull to promote simplicity. I think I should just stick with one for now. It's from a scientific paper by none other than John von Neumann, who's the most revered mathematician of the entire 20th century. Probably the closest modern person there was to someone like Gauss or Euler. I am not even close to being an expert in mathematics, so I can't really say firsthand the impact he's made. But you would think somebody with a mind like that, somebody so futuristic thinking, would be someone who would shun simplicity. But that's not true. In one of the most important quotes I've come across in my lifetime, I found that John von Neumann idolized simplicity too. And here's the quotation verbatim. Scientific models must satisfy certain aesthetic criteria. That is, in relation to how much it describes, it must be rather simple. I think it is worthwhile insisting on these vague terms, for instance, on the use of word, rather. One cannot tell exactly how simple is. Simplicity is largely a matter of historical background, of previous conditioning, of antecedents, of customary procedures, and is very much a function of what is explained by it. And Murray Gell-Mann kind of explained this point a little more simply, and I'll get to him later because he has a good point too. Simplicity, he actually tried to formulate a universal definition and a completely objective definition of simplicity. And basically what it was is how few words you can use to describe a thing. in all of its qualities and all of its parts. And of course, that's not really an objective answer. I know because there's hundreds of languages that have existed throughout human history. So, unless we come to an agreement on what the most accurate human language is, I don't think we'll ever probably establish that in society. So, simplicity is an incredible aesthetic virtue. Um, by von Neumann explicitly stating that scientific models must satisfy aesthetic criteria, and one of those criteria is simplicity. So the argument is a good theory is not just true, it should possess elegance and simplicity relative to what it explains. And this aligns him with thinkers such as Einstein and Poincaré, who viewed beauty and simplicity as actually indicators of good explanations. In fact, I don't know if there's a word for it, but it has been noticed by mathematicians that the most visually beautiful equations turn out to be the answers to um, very complex theorems that were mysteries. And I don't think we really know why that is. We might, and I haven't read up on it, but that is a known phenomenon that happens among mathematicians. So now we have to look at simplicity as compression, and this could probably be the easiest argument people could use against simplicity. But notice in the quote where it says, in relation to how much it describes. And it's very important to use that in relation to. Even simple things are not simple in and of itself. And any good philosopher knows that. For example, the human eyes, they're just one syllable. They're just two entities on our bodies, but they are anything but simple. They are the product of several systems, complex systems that have happened throughout the earth. And there's a great book called "In the Blink of an Eye" by Andrew Parker. It's a really mind-blowing book. So the evolution of the eye, if anyone knows anything about it, is completely dependent on the evolution of the planet. Good eyesight among organisms did not happen until the oceans became clearer. So eyes did not exist until it had a medium for which it could. So it's completely dependent on the earth. So that just to show you that even something as simple as our eyes are anything but simple. So, okay. So simplicity is valuable because it compresses complexity, not because it diminishes it, not because it takes away from it, not because it subtracts from it, but because it's actually a tool for complexity. And this was the reason I became a musician, or this is the reason I've dedicated a lot of my life to music. Because even among people doing things that I know I don't have a chance doing, like people doing, I'll just do one example to keep it simple. So something that I know I don't have any chance of becoming good at is something highly athletic, like gymnastics. I know in a million years I'll never get good at gymnastics. So you have somebody who is good at gymnastics training, and those are it's highly complicated to practice training. It's to practice gymnastics. And, part of the appeal for me as a musician would be like, what can I do that can be like an umbrella effect for people doing complex stuff? And the answer for me was, why don't I make music to accompany what people are doing? Why don't I make music that people can listen to while they practice gymnastics, or stuff that people can listen to while they work on math theorems and stuff? I know it's more of a fantasy than anything, but that is part of the appeal as to why I've spent so much of my life making music, and why music is still so important to me. Even though I've had a lot of lulls in my music journey, I've had times where I've thought about quitting. I've had times where I've hated music, but that's part of the appeal. It compresses complexity. Simplicity doesn't compress itself. It compresses complexity. So a short explanation accounting for many phenomenon is superior to long explanations accounting for the same phenomenon. And that sounds like common sense, but it's very useful and feels like information theory. But again, it's in relation to how much it describes. And of course, probably from a personal standpoint, a very convincing case I could make is simplicity is something that happens at the end result of mastering something. Many people, I mean, if you read that quotation I read out, you could look at the final text as anti-simplicity. But I think it could be read the opposite way, where it says one cannot tell exactly how simple is, and also that simplicity is largely a matter of historical background. While it is absolutely true that simplicity or objects, phenomenons, nouns that count as simple do change as knowledge advances. But humans have become very plastic, very resistant to those. So simplicity will always become a vital part of our life. So the argument, I think, is more that simplicity is not primitive. It's the most foundational stuff that remains after years of refinement, generations of advancement, discoveries. It's the final draw of it. So a modern physicist may find a concept simple that would have seemed impossibly complex centuries ago. And I think, guitar, well, I'll use my example, guitar. Thanks to the internet, people can look up how to play guitar like Alan Holdsworth or like Ted Green. Those are some of the hardest guitar players I've ever had to practice with. And anybody can learn Jimi Hendrix songs. 17-year-old can learn a Jimi Hendrix song. I was about 15 when I learned how to play Purple Haze. So the simplicity does change as we discover more and as our civilization gets more developed. So what would be simple on the guitar nowadays is totally different to what would be simple back when Jimi Hendrix was in his prime. And of course, the other way around. What Jimi Hendrix was doing during his lifetime was incredibly complex. Hardly anybody was doing what he did in his early years, which is finding different ways of playing the same chord in the same song. That's something hardly anybody was doing at the time, and that was seen as very complex. And now that's standard. It takes you don't have to play guitar for any more than 3 years to understand that. So it's not something unsophisticated; it's something distilled. And another great angle I can go at is simplicity as a means of explanatory power. So the last sentence that says simplicity in this excerpt is very much a function of what is explained by it. So simplicity, it's impossible to separate simplicity from usefulness. And a simple idea that explains nothing has no value. A simple idea that explains a lot has incredible value. The only thing simplicity cannot have is moderately valuable. It's either something not worth anyone's time if it's not communicating anything, if it's not entailing anything, or it can be the most useful tool anyone can have on their journey of mastering whatever. So the highest form of simplicity is explanatory simplicity, which I think that's kind of what I've been talking about when it comes to simplicity. And it's not the same thing as reduction. It's encompassing. It's not reducing anything. And then very briefly, I'm just going to talk about one more thing that simplicity has to offer. It's pretty important. It's emergence. So many people, because we live in pretty dire times right now from an economic standpoint, myself included, so many people around the world, in every corner of the world, have pretty much forgotten that emergence exists. That emergence is a feature it's a process that occurs in the universe. They think that you need something more to get something more. And that's not true. I have found out that's not true. Simplicity births everything. It precedes complexity. It's more complex than complexity because it allows complexity to become understandable. And that's what turns people off about complex ideas, is that they're hard to understand. Thanks to simplicity, people can understand it and make even more complex things with it. So simplicity is of infinite importance to me. And I'll say it one more time, if there's something I do worship in music, in art, in life, it's simplicity. I could go on and on and on still. There's still things I have not even touched on yet. But that's pretty much the gist of it. Maybe someday I'll talk more about the musical side of it, about how it specifically impacted my music. But against all the aspects of my life, simplicity has done incredible good, incredible altruism in my life. And it's simply wanting less, using less, because it allows emergence to happen. People think that when you have less, you won't get any more than you already have. But if you refine it, I think it'll surprise even the smartest people how much can emerge from simplicity. Thanks to emergence, we have an entire universe of billions of galaxies, billions of stars in each galaxy, black holes, neutron stars, complex life forms, intelligent life forms that understood the universe enough to invent things like language and mathematics, that all came from a singularity. It wouldn't have had a chance of happening without emerging from something simple. I hope I have maybe not so much convinced people that simplicity is the way to go, but I hope I have inspired at least one person watching or listening that simplicity is something to be appreciated, and it has absolutely no reductionary value and has infinite emergent value. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you took away something from this. All right, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.